In the midst of a national assault on public education, the chambers of the Texas legislature are hosting a battle of their own. Over the last few years, Governor Greg Abbott has launched a crusade to overhaul Texas's education system. At the center of that crusade is the goal of enacting a school voucher program, diverting public tax dollars to private schools. After years of trying and failing to pass such legislation, Abbott has ultimately succeeded with Senate Bill 2, also known as the Texas Education Freedom Act. As of this recording, SB2 has passed both the Texas House and Senate and is now heading to the governor's desk to be signed into law. Since 2015, Republican-led states have established or expanded voucher programs. When SB2 is signed into law, it will be the largest state to do so by far, impacting over 5.5 million public school students. Texas's public school districts span urban cores, sprawling suburbs, and rural towns, meaning the scale of impact will be massive. With the help of our Schools for All caucus, we're taking a close look at why voucher programs are gaining ground, where Texas fits into the national trend, and what SB2 really contains. Hi, I'm your host, Marissa. I'm a member of Austin DSA and a former Texas public school student. And I believe protecting a free public education for all is imperative to DSA's vision of the future. And here's my co-host, Molly.
Hi, everyone. As a retired public school teacher and a new member of Austin DSA, this issue is very close to my heart. Public education is under serious threat, and I'm here today to understand what's happening and how we can respond.
You're listening to the relaunch of the Austin DSA Batcast, the voucher fight in Texas, what's at stake with SB2. Governor Abbott entered the 2025 legislative session more prepared than ever to pass school voucher policy. Voucher programs have been a tough sell, even amongst Republicans, leading to years of failed legislation and 4 special sessions. At their core, voucher programs redirect public education funds into private hands. These funds are moved into savings accounts or vouchers that parents can use for private school tuition, textbooks, school supplies, or tutoring. Voucher amounts vary by state and student. Low-income students or students with disabilities often qualify for more. On the surface, voucher programs look like financial assistance for families, but the reality is more complex and dangerous.
So that's the basic blueprint: public money, private use, and little or no oversight. But beneath that technical framework is a much deeper and dangerous agenda. Because vouchers aren't just about how education is funded, they're about who gets left out, who profits, and what happens when we let the market forces take over a public good or service. Let's talk about what these programs really mean.
School vouchers are presented as a noble effort to empower families, but they serve to undermine public education, gatekeep quality schooling, and further commodify education. The redirection of funds away from public schools is the most direct and devastating aspect of the voucher agenda. Abbott has gone so far as to withhold public funding in exchange for passing voucher legislation. Texas has not seen a meaningful increase in public education funding in 5 years, which has been worsened by inflation. In the previous session, $500 million was proposed for vouchers. That figure has now doubled to $1 billion in SB2. That $1 billion could be used for healthcare, infrastructure, or vital public services, but instead it's being earmarked to defund our shared educational institutions. As public schools are systemically underfunded, the offer of $10,000 for private education starts to seem appealing, if your child is even accepted. Private schools are not required to accept every student. They can and do turn away students based on test scores, disability, behavioral history, or financial background. These institutions are also not held to the same transparency or accountability standards as public schools. Vouchers shift public funds into unregulated, private spaces that often exclude the very students public education was designed to support. The history of vouchers also is rooted in white resistance to desegregation after Brown versus Board of Education. Private segregation academies were funded and protected under the same kind of logic we hear now, only with slicker language. This is the privatization of a public good. Education is a human right, not a profit center for the free market. While some lawmakers, especially rural Republicans, still oppose vouchers, others have fallen in line. In 2024, Abbott campaigned aggressively for pro-voucher candidates, flipping over a dozen key seats. That realignment delivered SB2 to the governor's desk to be signed into law, but this fight isn't over. It is time to stand up, speak out, and defend the future of Texas public schools.
The truth is, Texas isn't the first battleground for vouchers, and it won't be the last. What has passed here has already been tested in other states. And the results, they tell a much darker story than the glossy talking points about freedom and choice. Let's take a look at what voucher programs have already done and what's in store for Texas now that SB2 has passed.
Texas isn't the first state to pass a voucher program, so we don't have to guess what comes next. We can look at what's already happened elsewhere. Since 2021, 15 GOP-led states have established or expanded voucher programs. Arizona, for instance, expanded their savings account program, or what they call an empowerment scholarship account, to become universal in the summer of 2022. Every student in the state, even those already attending private school, was eligible to receive a savings account and put that money towards private school tuition, fees, and other expenditures. As the applicant pool expanded since its initial implementation in 2011, the cost of the program has expanded along with it. Now that the program has become universal, costs have grown exponentially and at the expense of other state programs. Fiscal year 2024 saw the savings account program cost an astonishing $738 million, a reality made even more dire considering the state's $1.4 billion budget shortfall. In 2025, costs are expected to grow to $864 million. Texas has roughly 5 times the number of students currently enrolled in public school than Arizona does. All those students are supposed to be eligible for these programs. To make up the difference, the Arizona legislature proposed and passed a new budget that slashed funding across the state government. $132 million cut from the Department of Housing, $41 million cut from the Department of Transportation, cuts to water shortage infrastructure projects, and low-income college scholarship programs. Hundreds of millions of dollars to programs that virtually every person in the state uses in some form, gone. It's not just about the money either. It's also about who is actually using the program. Let's start with 8%. 8% of eligible students in the state of Arizona are using the program. That means 92% of students in Arizona remain in public schools, yet the actual cost of the program approaches $1 billion. Additionally, the groups of people to whom private school is most inherently inaccessible are the same people utilizing the program the least. All across the state, areas with the highest rates of poverty are the lowest in terms of participation. Even if you look at just median income, the result is the same. The highest income areas of Arizona use the program the most, with the lowest income areas using it the least. It doesn't matter how you square it up, Arizona's Empowerment Scholarship Account is being taken advantage of by a diminutive minority of people who need it the least, all while overwhelming the state with its costs and impacting a majority of people who need that money the most. Where Arizona may have doubled down on their voucher scam, across the country, there are states like that of Illinois, which have begun to actually roll back longstanding education choice programs. Beyond the fiscal policy of it all, Illinois provides insight into the discriminatory practices that voucher programs enable in private schools. As private schools are not held to the same admission and academic oversight as public schools, verbiage around acceptance policies in these schools ranges from harmfully ambiguous to openly bigoted. Among the 85 schools receiving voucher funding in Illinois, 1 in 5 had anti-LGBTQ+ policies. Many of the private schools in the program were Catholic institutions, and their policies laid bare the discriminatory practices that public money was funding. The Diocese of Springfield prohibited the recognition of transgender students in every school policy, from pronouns to locker room access. Students who didn't comply could be expelled. The Diocese of Joliet described gender expression outside one's biological sex as a disconnection with reality. LGBTQ+ students were referred to counseling services intended to correct their orientation or identity. These schools refused to use terms like gay or lesbian, claiming labels falsely promote a lasting identity. In essence, students were told, you can exist here, but only if you stop being who you are. Several dioceses in Illinois, including Peoria and Rockford, barred pregnant students and married students from enrollment. Students who had had abortions could be forced to withdraw. Others were excluded from academic or extracurricular activities simply for being young parents. This policing of students' personal lives would be unthinkable in public schools, but vouchers made it publicly funded in private ones. Of the more than 400 schools in Illinois' Invest in Kids program, fewer than 13% reported serving any special education students. Empower Illinois, the state's voucher facilitator, listed only 20 schools that supported individualized education programs. The Archdiocese of Chicago explicitly stated that families should check with each school individually to see if their child's needs should be met. The Diocese of Peoria said schools could terminate enrollment if a student's needs were too disruptive or misunderstood. Families were often expected to pay out of pocket for supports like one-on-one aids. Some dioceses openly admitted that they would not provide auxiliary aids, assistive technology, or personal support staff. Even when diocesan policies suggested they could accept students with disabilities, there was no enforcement, no accountability. What do all of these examples have in common? They were publicly funded through a state voucher program, just like the one Texas is now set to enact. These discriminatory, exclusionary policies were made possible because voucher-funded schools operate outside the legal protections and oversight that govern public schools. When public money goes to private institutions with no regulation, we're not empowering families, we're funding segregation, exclusion, and the erosion of civil rights. SB2 is not a standalone idea, it's part of a national agenda, and Texas is poised to become its next testing ground.
Now that we've broken down how vouchers work, let's talk to some people who've been in the thick of this fight in Texas. Peter K. and Sarah S. are organizers with School for All, a campaign organized by Austin DSA to protect and expand public education in Texas. Peter and Sarah, thank you both so much for being here today.
Hi, I'm Sarah Swallow, a leader in the Austin DSA chapter and former high school teacher.
And I'm Peter Kim. I'm the vice chair of the Schools for All campaign. And I've been a DSA member for about 6 years now. Didn't realize that.
So our first question is for Sarah. Can you walk us through what the fight against vouchers has looked like over the last few years?
Yes, so for the past several years or even longer, the leadership in the Texas legislature has been trying to pass a school voucher bill. Not all of the leadership was necessarily on board, but at least Governor Abbott and Dan Patrick have been gunning for this for quite a while. And every year over the past few sessions, at least, the Republican Texas House wouldn't do it, even though the majority of Republicans in the Texas House have indicated that they support a school voucher bill. There's always some holdouts, somewhere between 10 to 20 Republicans, maybe more in previous years, who said, you know what, we don't think this is good for our district. We don't actually want a voucher bill, even if, Governor Abbott or whoever else says they want it. We're not ready to do that right now because, they don't have private schools in their district. If you're in a small community, often the public school is one of the best or one of the biggest employers in the area. And these smaller communities do not want vouchers. They don't want to lose any school funding. About 14 Republicans in the Texas House voted against funding vouchers in the budget fight back in 2023. And a lot of those 14 Republicans are no longer in the Texas legislature. Governor Abbott and some of his allies pulled out all the stops to unelect those people. So there were 7 or 8 Republicans in the Texas House that lost election because Governor Abbott helped funnel many, many thousands of dollars into primary opponents. So these are other Republicans running against these rural Republicans. And they didn't run against them on the voucher issue. They instead ran on something like the incumbent is weak on immigration, or the incumbent, has some other issue. But really, the money was coming from pro-voucher sources. And there are also a handful of Republicans that just didn't run for re-election, probably because they saw the writing on the wall. So we came back this session, and many of those 14 Republicans in rural areas had already been dealt with. And so that is a big part of understanding the context of what happened in this session.
Wow, I actually didn't realize that the organizing for pro-vouchers went that deep to the point where they were unseating, finding a way, like finding any way to unseat Republican votes.
It's probably unprecedented in Texas that much happened.
Wow. The next question's for Peter, related to the previous question. Why do you think vouchers have been historically such a hard sell, even in Republican-controlled legislature?
I think it's because people can they can tell that it's a scam. So like for the Schools for All anti-voucher campaign that we embarked on, the work that we ended up doing brought us in contact with a lot of probably Republican voters in David Spiller's district, which is pretty rural, pretty you think of rural Texas, it's a pretty good reproduction of that. But you just talk to regular folks, you explain to them I've had a bunch of interactions where I just explain to them oh, if you haven't heard about the voucher program, if you want to send your kid to private school, you can receive a $10,000 grant from the state to do that. And I didn't have to prompt them on it. They automatically just realized, wait, that's a scam. These are public tax dollars. Why the hell is it being given towards people who want to send their kids to private school? Private school is private. Use your own money for it. And so they're very vocal. They call their reps, and their reps are very aware that their constituents hate it. So in the aftermath of the vote that happened last week, for example, Representative Barry, who campaigned specifically against vouchers, he's trying to make the rounds, doing damage control, trying to explain to his constituents why he cast the vote he did, and he could not make the defense. He could not make his defense on the merits of vouchers. He knew it was run. And so the way he attempted to defend his decision was instead to point out that if he had voted against the bill, all of his legislative priorities would have been killed. So yeah, no one likes vouchers, not even the representatives like vouchers. They cannot defend it. And the only reason they did it was because they're bullied into it, like Sarah said.
Sarah, next question's for you. What role has the Schools for All campaign played in building resistance to these bills?
Great question. So there are a lot of different groups around the state that got involved in this fight. Lots of think tanks, lots of nonprofits, lots of just community groups, etc., PTA groups. DSA, I would say we're unique in a few ways. One is that we have a ton of active members who really want to do active participation in politics. We have a lot of mostly young people, but there is some diversity in the age. Folks who want to get out there, they want to talk to regular people, and they want to actively fight for working class interests. And so what Peter and I and the other leaders in this campaign saw as our job is how do we connect these DSA members with opportunities to move the needle on this issue. And then the other truth is that, voters in Republican districts need to know what's happening with this voucher bill. A lot of folks don't know. The average Texan does not know who represents them in the Texas legislature. They cannot name their state rep or state senator, and they're usually not that up to date with what's happening in the legislature. So we had to figure out ways of contacting them and just disseminating this information. How can we use our army of people power in DSA to just spread information, which just helps democracy work better, and it helps empower regular people. So the ways we found of contacting them were mostly in-person crowd canvassing, like Peter was describing, that we did out in Lampasas and in David Spiller's district. And then we also did a bunch of phone banking. So calling voters that live in these districts that we figured were probably swing districts. So of course we had to identify targets first. Not all Republicans are the same when you're looking at this issue. So we did a lot of research and power mapping, which are really good skills for our members to learn. A lot of our folks have learned a lot more about the Texas legislature through all this process, but we gathered information based on previous votes, stuff we could find on social media, and various intel that we were able to gather to figure out which Republicans are on the edge, that they may or may not vote for the voucher bill. Some of them we decided were lost causes, based on things they've said and done and how they voted in the past. So we did some, strategic mapping and then figured out, okay, now that we know which districts to focus on, how do we get as much information to those voters as possible so that they can make their voices heard? Because a lot of these Republican legislators, they're not going to listen to what people in Austin think. Their job is to represent their district. So the key to trying to kill this bill was to make sure that there's a lot of public input. And I think we did, a pretty good job of maximizing that. I think we added some value there. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough, when you consider everything else that was going on against us.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that insight. That's very helpful to hear a little bit more about like how the campaign actually functions and like what the tactics are. Next question is for Peter. Was there a moment in this fight that felt like a turning point for you or the movement?
Actually, this is something that I'm interested in Sarah's perspective on as well. But for me, honestly, it's like kind of like yes and no. No, in the fact that like a lot of it was so, there's a little bit of time where at the beginning of this campaign, we're just mostly strategizing, talking to people around the other public education advocates in Austin about what we want to do, who do we want to target. And then after that, we settled into, I'd say, a pretty steady rhythm of just like calling people and canvassing, calling people and canvassing. It was just that week after week after week. And so, like that's like I don't know, just like my impression of those memories is like we're just grinding away at it for a while. And I feel like that's like kind of like maybe what 99% of organizing feels like. It's also difficult for this particular campaign to know how well we're doing because, barring the ability to like ask these reps directly, it's like, how many calls have you been getting? How are you feeling about vouchers? It's a little difficult to gauge how it's been going. There was never really a point where, like we would sometimes call these representatives' offices and see like, what's their position on vouchers now? Very rarely would they ever like kind of give us a real crystal clear answer. They'd always be like wishy-washy about it and be like, I kind of want to see what the language of the bill is. I want to see what amendments come out. I'll, nothing to one way or the other. So that's like why I'm like, maybe there wasn't really a quote unquote turning point in all this, but I will say like kind of I guess there was a time where things felt a little qualitatively different. In that for me personally, like when we started canvassing, and that's because like on these canvases, like there were a lot of people who were trying this out for like the very first time. And I feel like they kind of jumped into maybe like one of the like harder types of canvassing to do as DSA, in that we had to drive quite a ways out to meet the people we wanted to talk to. And like the environment is also maybe not as friendly. Again, we're talking to rural Republicans. I don't want it to come off though like I'm like saying, oh, they're like a bunch of violent, like mean people. That's not the case at all. But given like what like political discourse has been like, one can understand why it might be kind of a little scary like going out there, especially if you've never canvassed before. And yeah, I thought that was like for me, like I think that's when like I kind of had like the impression that like, yeah, that's right. Like regardless of like how this fight turns out, we're still doing a lot of good stuff. Not just for like the people that we're talking to, but also like people in our chapter. Like these are the tools that people are going to need if they want to remain like if they want to grow in their capacity to organize and engage on the things that they actually care about. So yeah, that's my impression. I'm curious on like what Sarah's thoughts are here.
Yeah, I kind of want to double down on some of what Peter said, because the canvassing in person really was great. And I highly recommend it. And I think everyone who went was glad they did it. It would have been fun if there had been some more obvious turning points in the campaign, but there wasn't really. I mean, there were some like little like ups and downs, when we get various information that made it seem like, oh, this is really encouraging, or then we get information the next week that's like, oh no, it sounds like, Republicans are turning against the way we want them to turn. The canvassing in a rural area, like a red area, is super fascinating. Most of the conversations were pretty good, but I mean, when you go into an environment like that, you do talk to people who have like just a different background from you. And I think that's really good for everybody to do sometimes. But we did have to like hear some people talk about their opinions on vaccines, which are different from ours. And so that is very interesting. Like, and there are some people that just had like other like misconceptions about what they think is happening in schools related to culture war stuff. And so like kind of hearing some of that was like a little bit like I would feel a little bit taken aback at first. People actually said stuff like they're turning the kids gay. They're encouraging alternative lifestyles in the schools. I heard that from at least 2 people. For a couple of people, that was the first thing out of their mouths. And so that's kind of like something you have to like kind of recover from after hearing. But it's really interesting how even when people have such a different background or such a different understanding of issues than I do, they still understand what impacts their pocketbook and what is, they understand public goods like the school system. And that is something that is like uniting, and we actually had some people that were really grateful to us, even though they, sometimes they weren't really sure what we were trying to talk to them about, but they eventually realized, oh, this is great. Thank you. Some people said like, God bless you for being out here and doing this. So yeah, I would say that I'm really glad we got to do that stuff. It felt very wholesome. And yeah, that was probably one of my favorite things that I did on this campaign.
Yeah, that seems like it was a really crucial part of the strategy for this campaign, was being able to like cut through all of the culture war stuff, like you said, and being able to like focus on specifically the part of the issue that affects everybody and unites everybody. So yeah, I agree. I think that's amazing that y'all had that experience and that new people in the campaign had the experience of, going into a new environment and like speaking to people who have a different like surrounding culture. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, just to add one more thing to that, like for me, it was just a very like concrete and gratifying example of like, our theory is like it's not this silly like left versus right, facade. The real fight is between the bottom and the top, and this was like one of those like ways where you can really like drive that point home.
Totally. Well, thank you, Peter and Sarah, for giving us that background in the first part of our interview. Now that we've heard how we got here, let's take a closer look at what SB2 actually includes and what it means for public education in Texas. Molly, tell us what we need to know.
In 2024, Abbott, as you know, changed his strategy. He used the election cycle, as Sarah described, to target lawmakers who oppose the vouchers on both sides of the aisle. And with money from national and state PACs, he successfully flipped over a dozen seats. The new legislative session opened in January 2025 with one clear mission: pass SB2. So what's in this bill? SB2 is formally called the Texas Education Freedom Act. It proposes creating education savings accounts that provide up to $10,500 per student. Parents can use these funds for private tuition, tutoring, educational materials, and even transportation. There's no requirement, however, for private schools to accept all students. There is no obligation to provide accommodation to students with disabilities, and there's no guarantee that the voucher covers full tuition, especially in elite or religious institutions. Private schools receiving these funds are not subject to public accountability, standardized testing, or even transparency rules. There's no funding increase for public schools in this bill. In fact, the entire $1 billion price tag comes at the expense of schools that serve the overwhelming majority of Texas school children. This bill shifts public money to private institutions and calls it freedom.
Thank you, Molly, for laying out those details of SB2. Now that our guests have walked us through the fight so far, and SB2 has passed both chambers and is heading to the governor's desk, we want to shift to what this moment means. Peter, let's start with you. What concerns you most now that SB2 is about to become law?
I mean, I think it's just like, oh God, where to begin? But like, I guess personally, like the fact that this is so damaging to public schools is like kind of what hits me first. Um, and again, like, okay, so like I was out in, like before we started canvassing land passes, I decided to go out there just to see what it was like. And it just happened to stumble upon a star party that the local middle school and the library were hosting. Um, and you know, I just like, I like stars, I like space stuff, I'm a nerd. I decided to stop by and just chat with them, like, you know, what are you guys looking at? And it was really cool actually. Like one of the guys, he had brought along a telescope that he had pointed at the Orion Nebula and was explaining to everyone, all the kids there, like what exactly people were seeing. And anyways, all this to say, like public schools are kind of like a community hub, one of the few community hubs remaining in America, and especially in these communities. And this is going to wreck them. And I think they're very acutely aware of that fact too. So like, I don't know, thinking about like programs like that needing to like get scaled back, cut funding, it's I don't know, it's depressing. And I guess like on a more like maybe like logistical note, while doing research for this, like you know, we all saw the example of Arizona that passed their universal voucher bill back in 2022, and the state is now facing a $1.4 billion shortfall in its budget now. And I think like what is it, like 400 million dollars of that is because of the voucher program. And to try to make up for that lack of money, they're cutting critical water infrastructure funding. And so like, you know, kind of think about that, like people who had nothing to do with vouchers, like in a state like Arizona that's, you know, prone to droughts, very dry, like now those services, that investment is getting cut because of this, you know, frankly dumb waste of money. And then finally, just like on a moral note, like this is shoveling money from people who pay taxes into the pockets of wealthy people. Like that's just personally infuriating, and I'm gonna have to wake up and go to sleep with that fact. You know, going forward.
Yeah, that's definitely grim. Um, Sarah, this is kind of related to what Peter was just saying, but what does this bill mean for working families, disabled students, and rural communities?
Yeah, the big transfer of money into wealthy people's pockets, like Peter described, is huge. It's going to hurt the Texas state budget for a lot of things, directly or indirectly. The worst of those consequences are not going to show up for a few years. So it may not be till 2029, 2031, or a little bit later that we see this budget nightmare. And, you know, Patrick and Abbott may have been retired by then. We're talking like 4, 6, 8 years into the future. But the freshmen and sophomore Republicans who are new, who, you know, voted for this voucher bill, they will get to find out what a budget nightmare looks like. It happens, you know, in most states, it happens, you know, not every session, but every once in a while it happens. I mean, we had one back in 2010, 2011 after the Great Recession. You know, it doesn't happen immediately. It usually takes a couple years for that tax income shortfall to really hurt a state, but we will be in a bad situation. That Texas has had a surplus past couple sessions, which makes people forget how bad it can be. And so, you know, and things are already bad in Texas in terms of so much is underfunded. I mean, from mental health to regular health care, et cetera, like we rank so low, one of the worst states in the nation. We don't have enough mental health beds. There's crisis within the juvenile prisons. And there's a whole bunch about that a few years ago, got in the paper for how bad the conditions were in those child prisons because of underfunding and understaffing, especially. I mean, shit's already on fire. and now we're going to have worse budget crunches in the future. You could do a whole other podcast on how many problems there are with the Texas budget and how many social services we are not funding properly. So there are a lot of chickens that are going to come home to roost from this, and it's going to impact all kinds of people, including, I mean, the Republicans themselves are going to be in a bad position if they're still in power 6 years from now, trying to figure out how do we craft a budget that doesn't like completely fuck the state over with the type of deficit that we have.
Yeah, so essentially it's already bad and it's just going to get a lot worse. So, Peter, now that SB2 is set to go into effect, looking back, what do you think could have been done differently in the fight?
Ooh, this is a good one. I'm sure both of us can say a lot about this, but I think personally, like I'll like focus in on like what maybe our chapter could have done differently, and maybe like what I personally could have done differently. I think like so this is like kind of my first time like um being part of like leadership of the campaign, and I wish I had known more about the resources that were available to us in terms of like, you know, researching who do we contact in these different districts, like how the Texas state legislature works, and like all the resources that are already available to DSA chapters from national. So like for one thing, and I hopefully this is helpful to other people running campaigns, like we do have great resources from national in terms of like how to make sure you stay in compliance. We always talk about our compliance officer. They're great. We also have Eric Wimmer, who is basically the guy that we talk to if we ever want to get in contact with other chapters around us, because like this fight, you know, it's a statewide fight, and we're trying to coordinate with other Texas state chapters on this. And I think one more thing that I want to add in there is Milo. I forget exactly what his title is, but he basically walked me through a bunch of like, you know, how do you use Van? What can you use it for? What else can you use? Like basically like a help desk. If you're like, I'm a noob at DSA campaigning and I want to know like what can I do? They're all great resources for just like, you know, bouncing questions off of. And yeah, like those are things that I wish I had known about before jumping into this, but you know, sometimes you don't know what you need until you actually start doing things. So I don't regret not knowing more. It's just, you know, would have been nice to know. I will say I'm very grateful to Sarah because she helped me a lot with like getting used to like work tools and Van and all that stuff. I feel like I'm a pretty independent worker, but it definitely would have taken me like probably days to figure out how to use all that. But she helped me distill it basically down and that learning process down into just a couple of hours. Great acceleration there. And then I think maybe like more like thinking about things more overall. Like I mentioned, this fight is something that we needed to involve the entire state in. And so we reached out to our sister chapters around Texas to try to pull them in on this. And I think we got pretty good momentum going in the beginning. But I think like one wrinkle there is like, you know, I think it's pretty clear that this is a fight that the Austin chapter was like kind of taking point on. And it wasn't something that like our other chapters had, you know, they hadn't really discussed it among their own body and voted on a resolution or anything like that. So, you know, we're like kind of pulling them along in this. And it took me a while to like kind of realize like that's the dynamic going on. So it would have been nice, I think, if we maybe like started off the campaign with that like structure in mind and have been more ready to like provide them with resources, with like just the simple task of like outreaching, activating their own members on this, generating turnout, and pointing them towards resources to use on like, okay, this is how you like these are the reps we want to contact in your area. These are the numbers you're going to call, and this is the Zoom link that we're going to do it on. And so yeah, I think that would have been like I think that would have like helped us like maintain like a broad like statewide effort there. But yeah, so them's my thoughts. I'm curious as to like what Sarah thinks here.
Yeah, those are great things, Peter, and thank you for appreciating all the help I offered, that I've, some skills I've accumulated through previous jobs and stuff. And we have other people in DSA who have those skills too. So it's really great to be able to disseminate that to newer members, like showing them how to use Van. I like what Peter's saying about how we mobilize people in other chapters and how it would have been better to do even more of that. But I will say this might be like the first time, maybe the first time ever, or the first time in a while, that we've done a project in Austin DSA where we've successfully collaborated with other chapters. It's just not that easy to do. It's not that natural, but we got started. And I mean, I think we do need more and more of that. So, I think last session we tried to, when we looked at vouchers a little bit last session as a chapter, but we weren't able to get much action from people in other chapters. And this year we got more. Yeah, if I could do things differently, it would be mobilizing even more DSA members to do even more things. Peter and I had a realization about halfway through when we were trying to get people to go crowd canvassing, that we should DM people directly, because we were having trouble getting people to sign up with things. But if you message people directly one-on-one, it really does work. Even if like 3/4 say they can't do it, if 1/4 do say they can do it, and you DM'd 50 people, hey, you've got like 10 or 12 people, and that is more people than if you had just put a blast message where everyone can see it. So asking people one-on-one, I mean, I know this is common sense for organizing, but it helps. So we could have, found ways to do even more of that. And I will say, this question is about what could have gone differently. So outside of us, there's a lot of stuff that we can't control, the Texas legislature. We've heard a lot of like rumblings and rumors about what may or may not have happened inside the building. And so we can't speak to that with a lot of authority, but I will say that just generally speaking with the Texas legislature, it's hard to really mount an opposition to the Republicans. Some of that is because it just is hard. Some of it is because not everyone who's a Democrat in the Texas House is serious about really being opposition, and I've seen examples of that firsthand. I'm not going to, be like doing the hearsay stuff on the podcast, but it's just hard. Like the Democrats in the Texas House as a minority are not good at banding together and really sticking up for what they need to stand up for. I mean, some of them definitely try, but there's probably a lot of weak points within their whole strategy and operation and how they do teamwork with each other that needs to be improved. But that might be, different people to have on the podcast to talk about that.
Yeah, it definitely seems like most people in the left's instinct when organizing and like speaking to representatives is to go after the Republicans. But like you said, a lot of times we actually need to be like hounding the Democrats to be doing more, because they always can be doing more. And I think it's great what y'all touched on earlier about this being kind of our first campaign where we really organized with other DSA chapters across Texas. And even though we unfortunately lost this specific fight, that does like set up a great framework for future campaigns, especially around this issue, being able to like cross coordinate with other chapters. So for what's left in this fight, I'll go to Sarah first. Do you think there's anything to do next in the fight to support public education / what is there to do?
As far as with the voucher bill, there's not much we can do in the short term because it is almost certainly going to become law at this point. And, it's an injustice and a disservice to most Texans, and we can't change that in the short term. Hopefully there will be political downsides for Republicans that this bill has passed. I mean, this is going to create a legacy and create history for Republicans. It's important for us to keep talking about it and to try to figure out how we can boost the efforts of labor unions and other pro-education groups that are trying to keep telling this story, because it's important that Republicans have electoral consequences. I don't know what that's going to look like, but we'll see how the midterms go. There'll have to be some kind of political upheaval to undo this bill and to really improve public education funding at this point. It's whether it's Governor Abbott losing re-election in the primary or in the general election next year, or if Republicans lose a significant number of seats in the House at some point. Or some big change nationally. Just the way things are going, the public education funding is unfortunately going to continue to chip away, is what I think is going to happen, or it's going to continue to be like relatively flat or not keeping up with inflation. And that is just a really sad situation to be in. And, we can't sugarcoat it and say that there's an easy way out right now. I think it's important for everyone in our society to try to support teachers in ways that you can, support your schools if there are ways that you can. I have not figured out what that looks like exactly yet, but yeah, it's kind of like, both sides, like you do some mutual aid to like, donate something to the school or volunteer to school if you feel compelled to do so, but then also figure out like, how do we politically change the course of things? It's going to take a lot, and it's ultimately going to take tax increases, in my opinion, to do everything that we have to do, not just for public education, but for all the social services that we need in Texas. Like, we need a huge change to how we handle the economy and how we handle just like the state's budget and how we invest in stuff. And none of that's going to come very easily. One of the first steps is just trying to educate Texans on what is the legislature. I really believe that half of voters forget that we have a Texas legislature. They know what Congress is. They know who Donald Trump is. They know we have a governor, Governor Abbott. But I've seen data that shows that like 80% of voters, if you ask them who is your state rep, they don't know. And there are opportunities for people like us in DSA to keep trying to do that political education everywhere we can, because we can't change a legislature if voters don't even know what the legislature is or what it's doing.
Thank you for that insight. Peter, did you have anything to add to that?
Right, just to kind of embellish on what Sarah said, like, like I didn't know what the Texas legislature was before I joined this campaign. I didn't even know who my representative was. I know who it is now, but yeah, that wasn't the case before. And yeah, regarding like, like the most immediate thing people can do about this is to just talk about it. And I think like concretely what that can mean is like, this may be a little awkward, but we're in like group chats with friends, right? May not be as engaged as we are in these kinds of things. And it can sometimes be just like, like in those group chats be like, hey, an election is coming up. Here's like my personal recommendations for you to vote for and why. Like in terms of like supporting, and like a good way to do that is like in the coming months and years, there are going to be school board elections. If we want to politically like support our teachers and our public education institutions, we got to be voting for people to boards who are going to fight the ledge on this, who are not going to roll over and try to play nice with the government, because it's hostile. And so I think those are some concrete ways we can like remain engaged in this. Another like kind of immediate short-term things that I think I'd like to highlight, especially for people in our chapter, is like we should maintain the relationships that we built with non-DSA in this campaign. We've been chatting with like a lot of people from Education Austin in this, and they're holding a few events in May. They're doing a thing, the Solidarity Fest that Education Austin is hosting, I think is going to be May 15. People should definitely come out to that. Again, talk to your local teacher unions and like figure out from them like what's the best way to move forward with this. I think another thing for people to be aware of is like, the overarching theme here is public education is under attack. So how do we defend public education? It seems like right now, like something that a lot of people are worried about is a state takeover of ISDs in Texas. The state took over Houston. I think it was Houston ISD last year, a few years ago. And I only got to talk about it a little bit with them, but it sounded absolutely terrible. And next on their list are, you know, Austin ISD, this liberal hellhole that they want to, you know, rip all the woke and DEI out of and replace with the good Christian family values. We're definitely up there on the target list. Dallas ISD is up there as well. And yeah, like we just like to prepare for stuff like that. Again, like gotta remain informed. Tell your friends about this. Just to, you know, be on the lookout for stuff like this. When you see articles in the news about like, oh, these schools are failing, like that's gonna be their cover to come in and justify like, okay, now we the state need to step in and correct these failing institutions.
Thank y'all both so much for being here with us, Peter and Sarah. Your voices in the work for the Schools for All campaign are absolutely vital to this moment. Is there anything y'all want to say before you sign off?
For people in DSA who or thinking about DSA, highly encourage y'all to come out. Our chapter is doing a lot more than just anti-voucher fights and public education advocacy. We have our trans rights bodily autonomy campaign going on. Gato organizing with tenants unions, and we also have a lot of fun. If you ever want to like chat with me, you can hit me up on our Slack server or catch me at a GBM or a happy hour. I'm going to be doing karaoke with Papo at Hole in the Wall.
Yeah, thank you all for listening.
Wow, Marissa, I'm a little overwhelmed with everything we learned today. Can you help me wrap my brain around it?
Sure. Here's the bottom line. The largest state public school system in the country is at risk of being defunded from the inside out. SB2 was sold as a win for families, but it's a loss for equity, transparency, and democracy. But the fight to protect public education is not over, and you can help. Tell them how, Molly.
We are not powerless. Here's what you can do to help defend public education. Join the School for All's campaign with your local DSA chapter. Keep calling your state representatives and let them know what's going on in your schools. Visit our show notes for scripts, links, and contact info. Also, you can talk to your community, friends, coworkers, neighbors, let them know what's happening. And don't forget to share this episode far and wide.
And with that, thank you everyone for tuning in to our relaunch episode of the Austin DSA Batcast. Check out our previous 2 episodes. We'll include a link in the show notes. And stay tuned for our future episodes where we'll be focusing in on the issues Austin DSA is organizing around and giving you a look into our campaign work. We're just getting started and the work ahead is real, but so is our power. Subscribe, leave a review, and check the notes for everything we mentioned today. We'll see you next time. In the meantime, keep showing up, keep fighting, and keep believing in public schools for all.